Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining Grant System Training Part 2, Financials and Reporting. I appreciate everyone taking the time this morning to attend today's webinar, where we will be learning about how to enter in expenses and how to submit reimbursement requests through the new grant management system, Amplify. I wanted to provide a little bit of an overview of the topics and the material that we'll be covering in today's session. I'll present a reminder of this and then any other subsequent sessions that we'll be providing as we continue to roll out Amplifund for all of your active awards that you're managing from the Department of Economic Development. In addition, since we're transitioning to a new grant management system, there are a number of resources that are available to you to help you perform the actions that we're covering today, in addition to any other actions that may be required for you to complete for your award. So I wanted to review a number of the resources that are available and make sure that you know how to access all of the materials that will help you manage your grants in Amplifund. After we discuss that, we'll be looking at an overview of some of the actions we're going to be completing today in the system. So before we actually get into the system and walk through how to complete those actions, I'll just present a number of topics that we'll be looking at to kind of set the table in identifying what we'll be exploring today. At the end of our session, we will have a Q&A session, but we also encourage you to submit your questions to us throughout the presentation. So if a question comes up and you're looking for an answer, then please feel free to go ahead and submit that via the Q&A feature on your WebEx. The Q&A feature can be accessed at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx window. Click on the three dots that you see in that bottom right-hand corner and select Q&A. From there, you'll be able to submit questions. There's a number of DED program staff that are on the call today to assist with any program-related questions. And in addition, there's Amplifund technical support that's on the call as well for Amplifund-specific questions. So we will have a Q&A session at the end of today's webinar, but we also encourage you to submit any questions you may have via that Q&A feature on the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen. Select the three dots and select Q&A to submit those questions. Looking at today and also looking ahead to additional sessions that we'll be providing. Today's session we'll be covering financials and reporting, as I mentioned, being able to view your budgets, access and track expenses, and then submit your drawdown requests. That will be covered within today's 2-hour session. The following week, on August 4th, we'll be offering a session exclusively for CDBG PSR submission and how to do that in Amplifund. So if you're managing a CDBG award and you want to learn more about how to submit your PSR through the system, August 4th from 9:30 a.m. to 11 a.m. Central Time, we'll be offering a session specifically about that. There are also a number of sessions that we've already provided and ramping up towards transitioning to the Amplifund grant management system. Those can be found on the DED support site, which you can access by going to opportunity.nebraska.gov/Amplifund. On the support site, you'll find a number of videos and PDF documents walking you through specific actions that you need to perform within Amplifund. There's a lot of tutorials, how-to guides that include screenshots, diagrams, and explanations of all the actions that must be completed in order to, for example, enter your expenses and submit payment requests. So there's also documentation that's specific to your program. So when you're on the opportunity.nebraska.gov/Amplifund website, please make sure that you're scrolling through and you're selecting the program that you're managing an award for program-specific content. In addition to the content that's provided by Nebraska Department of Economic Development, you can also access Amplifund technical support resources by going to amplifund.zendesk.com. That is the Amplifund support site. You can also reach out to Amplifund support representatives by submitting a support ticket, either via email, by emailing support@amplifund.zendesk.com with your question. That'll go to our support representatives, and our support hours are Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Central Time. If you submit a ticket outside of business hours, then it just gets picked up and answered at the start of the next business day. And as always, if you have any program questions, always feel free to reach out to your DED program manager. Your DED program manager will be able to provide you with any support and answers to questions regarding your award, how to manage it, and also your program managers have been trained in how to utilize Amplifund as well. So chances are, if you have an Amplifund specific question, your program manager will be able to respond and to answer that question as well. So now that we've discussed a little bit of how to actually access support and reach out to those support resources, I wanted to just cover a brief overview of the topics that we'll be covering in today's webinar. The first thing that I wanted to point out is that Amplifund can be accessed through the URL ne.amplifund.com. This URL is accessible anywhere where you have an internet connection and a web browser. So whether at your home office or whether you're at your office, you'll be able to log in and go to this URL, put in your username and password, and sign into Amplifund. If you're an existing Amplifund user or applicant, if you're already managing an award, then just log in and enter the username and password you've already been using. If you are new to Amplifund, then you will be receiving an invitation email that will be coming from that email address at the bottom of your screen, no-reply@gotomygrants.com. There will be a link in that email that's inviting you into the system and prompting you to create a unique password. So if you're already an Amplifund user, if you're managing an award or applying to an application through Amplifund, use your existing credentials. For all new users, you'll be sent an email invitation from that address prompting you to log in and create a password where you'll be able to access your award. Once you get in and you access your award, you'll be able to complete the following actions that we're going to be covering in today's webinar. The first thing that we want to cover and talk about is how you can actually access your award budget and view specific details about any match requirement, any details about your budget categories or your budget line items. So we'll be taking a look at how you can access those budgets. We'll also talk about how we can submit your reimbursement requests, which starts by entering your expenses for your award. So we're going to take a look at how to get in, enter expenses for your grant funds, as well as match expenses, and how you can indicate where you spent program income as well. So we're going to take a look at that. That's one of the first steps that's required in order to eventually submit your reimbursement request or your advance request. So we're going to take a look at how you can enter your expenses in and then roll those into a reimbursement request, or how you can submit an advance request if the program allows it. In addition to being able to submit your payment requests, uploading documentation is a really important part of the process. So we'll be taking a look at how you can upload documents such as your professional services agreement, and maybe any other additional documentation that could be required depending on which program, which type of award you're managing. In addition to some of the support options that we've already talked about, offered by the Department of Economic Development and the Amplifund support ticket services, we'll also take a look at how you can access the Amplifund support within Amplifund itself. So we'll make sure that we cover that. Again, we'll have plenty of time for question and answer. And if you have any questions as we're going through, again, please make sure that you're utilizing the Q&A feature on the WebEx, the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, in order to submit questions via the Q&A feature. So at this point, I am going to get started with the in Amplifund version of today's webinar. So I'm going to transition and we're going to move away from the slides and we're going to start to dive into Amplifund to take a look at all the different actions that we'll be completing within the system. Now, one thing that I will mention, and you'll see here again on the slide that's present on the screen, that URL, ne.amplifund.com, that will provide you with access into your organization's Amplifund account. Again, if you are an existing user, just go to that URL and type in your username and password. If you're a new user, you'll be receiving an email invitation to create a password. If you're an existing user and you forgot what your password is, there is a password reset button when you go to that URL. So a lot of options there. Also, if you're going to be managing your awards in Amplifund, I would also recommend bookmarking that URL so you have easy access to it at any time. So now we're going to get started in terms of going through and looking at how to view our awards and our budgets within Amplifund. Just before we even get started, I'm going to go ahead and just provide a little bit of a brief overview of Amplifund navigation for those of us that are new. Also, a more in-depth overview of navigating in Amplifund was covered on a previous session. So if you wanted to go ahead and refer back to the DED support site, then you'll be able to find a link to the recorded session. So once again, once we receive our email invitation into Amplifund, which if you haven't already, you will either today or tomorrow, the latest, then you'll be able to log in. And when you first log in, you'll see this calendar here on your screen. There are three main points of navigation that we'll be looking at and utilizing today. The left navigation menu, which is the primary point of access that we'll be utilizing to access various parts of our Amplifund account. For example, today we're going to be using the grant management section a lot because we're going to be going into the grant section. And also the reports section, which is where you'll be able to find your request for funds report if you wanted to utilize if you needed to upload that and you wanted to get a copy to fill out. In addition, you also have your user drop-down menu, which is specific to your username and to your user account. So just click on the little drop-down arrow next to your name, and you'll see a list of options that are specific to you. Here, you'll be able to change your password. You'll be able to access your applicant portal if your organization is in the process of applying for an opportunity as well. So there are a number of features here that are specific to you. And then also we'll be looking a lot and we'll be utilizing here in the top right-hand corner this icon toolbar, which will feature a number of different icons that allow us to take action on specific pages within Amplifund. Some of the common icons that we'll be utilizing today are the create button, which is a plus sign, and the edit button, which is a pencil icon. And if you ever don't know what one of the icons does, you can always hover your mouse over the icon and it'll tell you exactly what that icon does. So those are the three main pieces of navigation that we'll be utilizing and that we'll be looking at today as we get in and focus on the financials and reporting. To get started, we're going to take a look at our grants page and we're going to go into the grant that I want to do some reporting on. So I'm going to go ahead and on this left navigation menu here, I'm going to click on grant management and then click on grants in order to access a list of all the grants that I have. So when I click on the grants management section, it's going to provide me with a list of all active awards that I have in my Amplifund account. So whether it's something that you've already been accessing and managing, over the past year within Amplifund, or if it's something that's older than 2020 that's still open, then you'll be able to access that here in your Amplifund account. So you'll see a list of all awards that you've been awarded or that your organization has been awarded. Today, the award that we're going to take a look at in terms of managing the budget and doing some reporting on the financials is this award that I have down here. So I'm going to click on the name of the award, and this is going to bring me to our award page, which will provide us with access into the budget and the payment request screens as well. A couple of things to note here when we click on and access this awards page is that as you're scrolling through, you'll be able to see key financial information on this page. So this is kind of a good first glance, a good first look here in order for me to look at our awards page and see kind of how we're doing and how we're progressing with our financials. So you'll be able to come in here and see what your total awarded amount is, if there's any match on it, and then also you'll be able to see information that's specific to how much you've expensed to date, and then how much you've invoiced and how much has been approved. You'll be able to use these features. You'll be able to use these indicators throughout the life of managing your grant. So you'll be able to look at it and you'll be able to kind of have an idea of what you're managing as you're going through and where you are in terms of the status on your grant. So in order to get started in terms of doing some reporting and some expense entry, let's first take a look at the grant budget. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click on the post-award drop-down menu here. And the post-award drop-down menu is going to have a lot of different options for me to access. The one that I want to look at today is financial and budget. This is the way that I'll be able to access my budget here. So I'm going to click on, again, post-award, go to the financial section, then go ahead and click on budget. And this is going to, like I mentioned before, provide me with access into our awarded budget. So through this screen, I'll be able to see exactly what my awarded budget categories and line items are. I'll also be able to see how the awarded amounts are distributed or allocated, whether it's in grant funds or whether it's in match. If you're first logging in and if you're looking at your budget and this match field isn't showing up, it's most likely because the match box here under options is unchecked. So when you first log in, your budget may look like this. If you do have match on your budget and you want to see what that looks like, then under options, you can go and you can select match, and then the match will appear here. So when you're managing your budget and when you're looking at it, again, you'll have your grant funded amounts, your match amounts. Some line items may have specific detail on them. You'll be able to click on either the category or the line item to identify, how much is allocated and if there's any other detail that's on the line item. In terms of looking at your budget and then beginning to report expenses, one thing that you can do here is you'll be able to begin to add expenses to begin the process of drawing down on your grant. So in order to enter in expenses, we can either go to find post-award, financial, and expenses, or we can go next to the line item and click on the dollar bill icon here in order to create expenses. What I like to do is I like to go to the expense page via the post-award, financial, and expenses. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click there. And this is going to take me to my expense page. So when I'm on the expenses page, I have a couple of different options here. The first option is I can either click run And that's going to show me a list of all expenses that I've already entered. So like I mentioned before, and like we were looking at on that details page, um, the you may already have expenses that are tracked against this budget, or especially as you're going along and as you're managing your grant, you'll continue to enter expenses. So if you wanted to see a list of all those expenses that have already been entered, you can click run right here and it'll show you all expenses for this particular grant. You can also look for a specific time frame by clicking on the drop down in the time frame. You can also view expenses by a specific category and line item as well. So use this as almost like a mini report for your expenses where you'll be able to click run and then see a list of any existing expenses. Scrolling down here, we're looking at all of the expenses that have been added in. And as we're scrolling through, I can also see that there's this actions icon here. And we can go ahead and we can click on the plus sign in order to create a new expense. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click on the plus sign to create a new expense. And here, when I click on expense, this window pops up where I can enter in the budget category and I can choose the line item for which I want to report on. So let's say that I want to enter in an expense for my general program administration here. And you'll see that once I enter in the category, then the line item populates. And I can enter in the direct cost. So when I'm entering in the direct cost, it's important to note that the direct cost should be the total amount of the expense, grant funded plus match. You may have an expense that includes both grant funds and match expenses. And if that's the case, then you'll just put the sum total of your grant funds and your match expense here in the direct cost field. So for example, if I'm entering in an expense for $1,000 and 800 of that is grant funds and I matched it with $200, I'm going to put in a total of $1,000 and I'll be able to indicate the breakdown of how much of this $1,000 is match here in this financials tab, which we'll go to in a little bit. So again, the direct cost is the total amount of grant funds plus match. We also have this box here where you can check exclude from match. So if your expense doesn't include any match dollars, you can go ahead and you can check this box. Since my expense does, I'm going to leave this box unchecked here. The next couple of fields will auto-populate. It'll show the responsible person for the line item, and it'll also show the username of the person that's creating the expense, which in this case, it's me right now. So these will default or auto-populate based on the information that's already in the system. Here on the expense date field, you'll be able to indicate the true expense date here for which the actual invoice was paid. So when you're putting in the expense date, it's important to note that your expense date should reflect the date that the invoice was paid. The date will automatically default to today's date. So please be sure that you're going in and as you're creating your expenses, you're checking the expense record here. You're using the calendar icon and you're going to be able to use this calendar icon here to choose the true date of the expense, the date that the invoice was paid. So for example, if I'm in and I'm entering in an expense for my May time period, then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to scroll and I'm going to find May and I'm going to enter in the expense date, the date that that invoice was paid. So May 11th was the date that that invoice was paid. This is also important because the next step after creating expenses before submitting our drawdown request will be to submit a reporting period, which is based on monthly intervals. So whichever expense date, whichever month your expense date falls into, will be the month that your expense will roll into on your reporting period. So it's very important to be as accurate as possible, entering in the date that the invoice was paid here on the expense date. In addition, we have the expense status field, in which the expense status should be marked as reviewed. So when I'm going in and when I'm clicking on this drop-down menu, I want to check on reviewed. The reason why we want to check on reviewed here is because we want our expenses to roll in to our reporting period, which in turn will roll into your drawdown request. So in order for the expenses to roll up, then you'll want to have those marked as reviewed here. Two additional fields that you have access to but are optional, the payee field and the description field. Here, you can enter in a payee by selecting create new and then entering in the payee for this expense. You can also add in a description. Again, these last two pieces, these last two fields here are optional. So again, just remember this first page of the expense page, we're entering in our direct cost, which is the total amount of grant funds plus match on the expense. We're entering in on the expense date, the date that the invoice was paid, and we're marking the expense status as reviewed. Now, if our expense does have any match contributions included here in this direct cost, then we'll want to indicate that on the financials tab of your expense. So here on the financials tab, you'll see that you'll be able to enter in these amount fields, you'll be able to enter in the total amount of cash match that is part of this $1,000. So right here, I can see right now I entered in our direct cost, it's $1,000. And until I actually enter in the match on this line right here, this is going to stay at zero. So if I want to indicate that $200 of this 1,000 is in match funds, then I'll go in and I'll be able to type in 200. And as soon as I enter that in, these fields up here at the top begin to update. So when you're entering in the match portion of your expense, again, remember, type that in here in your cash match field, and then this will automatically update. So now it makes a little bit more sense. You know, my direct cost, my total cost of the expense was $1,000. If I go back to that financials tab here, I was able to establish the breakdown that of that $1,000, 200 are match expenses. And I was able to enter that in here, and now I can accurately see the breakdown of grant funds plus match. Here on the attachments tab, this is where we'll be required to upload our source documentation. So on every expense that we entered, it is a requirement to upload the source documentation. So in order to do that, you'll be able to go to the upload files button here. And you'll be able to click on choose file. When you click choose file, you'll be able to upload your invoice, whatever else is considered as the source documentation that's required for your expense. But this is a required aspect of the expense entry process where you will have to enter in your source documentation here on the expense. In addition to attaching the source documentation, we also have an additional tab here where you can indicate if there's any program income or RLF being dispersed here So not all programs will have this, but most will. And if you do, then if you do have any program income, then you select yes, and you enter the total amount of program income here. Maybe you may not have, and the same thing with the RLF funds, you would select yes and enter the amount. If you don't have anything, you'll select no, and you'll enter in a 0. You'll also note here at the bottom, there's an additional section to enter. This is for advance requests only. So not all programs allow advance requests. This is a separate process. We'll actually dive a little bit deeper into how to fill out this advance section later when we get to submitting advance payment requests. So entering in expenses, just to do a brief recap on this expense that we're entering. Here we are entering in our expense. We're putting in the direct cost, which is the total amount of grant funds plus match. Entering in the expense date, which is the date that the invoice was paid. We are changing the expense status to reviewed in order for the expense to roll up into our reimbursement request. We're going to the financials tab, and we are entering in our match amounts if applicable. The attachments tab shows us where we can upload our source documentation, which is a requirement on every expense. And then the final tab here allows us to access and indicate if there's any program income or RLF that's associated with this expense as well. So once we have all these fields populated, we can go ahead and click on Create. One thing that I will mention, and a question that has been coming up, is how we enter expenses. If we enter them in as a lump sum or one by one, the recommendation is to enter and submit one expense per receipt or invoice. So again, the recommendation is submit one expense per invoice. And that's the process that we're going through here today as well, walking through the webinar. So I've created my new expense, and I can go ahead and I can see that that expense has been created here. This looks good. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to submit another expense because there are a couple of different ways where we can add expenses. One is where we have an expense like we just created, where we have both match funds and grant funds, but we can also submit an expense that has match funds only. So some programs will require that you submit all match expenses. Different programs have different requirements. If you do have a match only expense, a lot of the process is similar. So you're going to enter in the category and line item that you're entering in your match expense for. The direct cost field is still the total amount of grant funds plus match. So let's say I'm entering in a match expense and it's for $300. Since there's no grant funds that's also associated with this expense, I'm going to go ahead and just type in 300. And then as we saw before, we'll be able to indicate that the total amount of this 300 is matched on this financials tab. So I'm going to not select exclude from match because we know that this is going to be a 100% match expense. These two fields, again, auto-populate. Then we get back to our expense date. So again, the expense date, I'm going to use the calendar icon here, and I'm reporting my May expenses. This is the date that the invoice was paid here for my match expense. So I'm going to put that in. And then we have our expense status, which I want to mark as reviewed in order to show that our expense here is going to roll up into our reporting period, and in order for that reporting period to incorporate this expense. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go to the financials tab, which is going to allow me to indicate the total cash match amount here for this request, for this expense, I'm sorry. So when I go to this section, then I'll be able to go to the dollar amount field, and I'm just going to type in that the total 300 is all matching funds. So we'll be able to see that here. Again, our attachments tab, this is where we're required to provide documentation and our source documentation for every expense. And then this final tab is where we're going to be indicating if there is any local program income or RLF. So same process, just different fields where we're populating. We're still going in and we're typing in the total amount of the expense, just that on the financials tab, we're indicating that 100% of the expense is a match contribution. So we're going in and we're indicating that here in the financials tab, attaching our source documentation here, and then indicating if any program income or RLF is being utilized. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create my match only expense by clicking on create. And now that we have an expense that we've created together for the month of May, that's grant funds plus match, and then a match only expense, let's take a look at how we can create an expense that's grant funds only. So I'm going to go again back to the plus sign here on the actions tab. I'm going to click on plus, and this is going to bring me back to the expense page. I'm going to select the budget category. I'm going to select the line item. And then here in the direct cost, again, direct cost is going to be grant funds plus match funds. So, no matter what, I'm putting the total amount of expenses here. So I'm going to put in my total amount. And since this one is actually grant funds only, we're going to go ahead and I'm going to just check this exclude from matchbox. So what this allows us to do here is this actually allows us to indicate that there's no match that's being expensed here. And it basically renders our financials tab where you indicate the match, it removes those fields from the financials tab. So here, direct cost on this grant funded only expense, $250. I select exclude from match, and there's not even an option here to enter in any match funds. Here on the expense date, we'll be able to, again, indicate the date that the invoice was paid. So we're in here, we're working on our month of May report. So I'm going to type in my May date. And on every expense, we have to mark the expenses as reviewed. Just to show you an example of what happens if we don't mark an expense here as reviewed, I'm going to leave the status as new, and I'll show you how it gets flagged and how you can come back and you can mark it as reviewed appropriately later. There may be a scenario where you forget to do this step. It's clearly identified later on that you have unreviewed expenses. So I'll leave this one as new and we can see what happens and we can see how to interact with that. Since I checked the exclude from match box, there's nothing to do here on the financials tab. There's no match amounts to add in. On the attachments tab, however, I still have the requirement where I have to enter in the source documentation here. So I have to click choose file, upload my source documentation for this, and making sure that the proper documentation is attached to every expense. We're still going to this last tab here to indicate if there's any program income or RLF. And once we have everything populated here, I'm going to click on the create button in order to get this created. And now keep in mind here that when we are creating this expense, I'm intentionally creating this as new in error so I can show you what it's like to go through the process of identifying it and then going through and marking it as reviewed after the fact. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click on create. I have our 3 expenses here that we've created, and you can see, we have our 2 reviewed and 1 new expense. So that's the process for creating the expenses. Now that we've created the expenses, there's a step that we need to take in order for us to be able to, there's a step that we need to be able to take in order for us to roll those expenses into our drawdown request, which is to create a reporting period for the month of expenses that we're requesting. So in order to access our reporting periods, I'm going to go to the post-award drop-down menu, and we're going to go to management and reporting periods. And when I go to this reporting period section, I'm going to get a list of any reporting periods that I've already submitted. And I'll also be able to create a new one. So again, in order for us to roll this expense up into our drawdown request, we also have to create a reporting period. The budget reporting periods are set up on monthly intervals. So you'll be creating a reporting period per month of your grant. You have 1 monthly reporting period that you can submit a drawdown for. And we're going to take a look at how you can submit the month of May, because that's the one that we just filled out together. We're also going to take a look at what happens if you enter in an expense for May after you've already closed out the month. So we're going to look at a couple of different scenarios here in terms of creating our reporting periods. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go and I'm going to initiate the creation of the reporting period by going into my top right-hand corner in the icon toolbar and clicking on the plus sign. Once I do that, it asks me what type of reporting period I would like to include. So since we are rolling up our expenses, we're going to go ahead and we're going to click on expenses. Under what period of time, you'll select the month that these expenses were entered for. So remember, those all had May dates on them. So all those expenses are going to roll up into my May monthly reporting period. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click on save, and that's going to create my reporting period. So once I'm in the reporting period, once I've created it and I get it opened up, you'll be able to see here at the top the start and the end dates of the reporting period. You'll be able to see the total awarded amount of your grant. And then you'll also be able to see here the total amount that you've expensed for the period. So this is calculating and this is rolling up all of the reporting periods here for it's rolling up all the expenses for this month. The total will be showing in here. Now, I did mention that if you have any expenses that you did not mark as reviewed, those expenses will not roll into your reporting period. So if that's the scenario where you do have expenses that are not rolled into the reporting period, it'll tell you right here that you have unreviewed expenses for the month. So I mentioned if you enter in an expense and it's not marked as reviewed, then when you go to create the reporting period, it does not roll into your total. And you also get kind of red flagged here to notify you that you have an unreviewed expense. So remember, together we created that one expense that wasn't reviewed intentionally so that we could go through the process of seeing what it looks like on the reporting period and then going back and fixing it. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select, you can It'll tell you how many unreviewed expenses you have. It may be one, it may be several. You can click on the number in order to take you back to the expense page where you'll be able to see a list of expenses for the month of May, and you'll be able to resolve and correct the expenses that are not marked as reviewed. So it takes me back to the expense page here. And remember, we had this search functionality. This search functionality is going to allow me, it's going to default to the month of May because we came here from that May reporting period. So this is going to allow me to click run. I can see all of the expenses that I have for May. And I can see I do have one that's marked here that's not reviewed. So there's a couple of different ways that you can go ahead and you can mark this as reviewed. You can click on the pencil icon to edit the expense. And then just the same way we were marking expenses as reviewed before, you can go to expense status and just click the drop down as reviewed. Or if you have several expenses and you wanted to do it through here, you could check the box next to any expense that you have that's not marked as reviewed. There's also a select all feature here. And you can click the check mark to mark that expense as reviewed right from this screen. So if I click that, it's going to ask me mark all of the selected expenses as reviewed. I want to say yes, let's do it. I click on complete and it gets updated. The expense is now marked as reviewed. So now that this expense is marked as reviewed, my expectation is that if I go back into my reporting period section, I'll be able to pull up that May reporting period and I should see the entire expense total for May totaling in there. And where it said number of unreviewed expenses, it should say 0. So to go back to my reporting periods, I'm going to that post-award drop-down menu, going to management, and going to reporting periods. So now that we're back here in our reporting periods, I can see here's my month of May. Let's go ahead and let's click on it. And this takes me back into my reporting period where I should see here on the reporting period, I should see that we have our total awarded amount. The total expense amount for the period is updated. And as I mentioned before, because it's been updated with all of our reviewed expenses, I can see here that I have 0 unreviewed expenses. So once you verified that your reporting period shows the total expense amount for May or for whatever month you're reporting on, and then you have unreviewed expenses as 0, then you'll be able to scroll down. You'll be able to click on close in order to close out the reporting period and begin the process of submitting a reimbursement request. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click on close. And once I've closed my reporting period, now I'll be able to begin initiating the process of submitting my payment request through Amplifund to my program managers at the Department of Economic Development. One thing that I'll mention before we get to the creation of our payment requests is that on every payment request, we need to make sure that we're attaching a request for funds form. Now, you may have access to a request for funds form template that you can fill out and get signed. There's also one that's available within Amplifund. If you navigate to reports and recipient, you'll be able to choose the RFF form that's appropriate for your program. So for example, if I'm filling out a reimbursement request for a CDBG program, I can open up this report and this will give me the request for funds form with some details on it already populated but you'll be able to export this report into Excel and then begin to fill it out. So if you don't have a request for funds form, or if you just prefer to use the one that's provided in Amplifund, you can access it by going to reports, indicating the form that you want to download or that you want to view, and then you'll be able to click on the export to Excel button here, and that will produce the Excel file for you that you can fill out and then upload the request for funds form once we get to that part in the payment request process. All right. So now that we've looked at how to enter in expenses and make sure that they're rolling up into our reporting periods, using that reporting period to make sure that we've entered our expenses in correctly, and then closing that reporting period, now we're ready to submit our payment request. And there's a couple of ways that we can get to the payment request page. You can either submit a payment request directly from this reporting period by going back to your reporting periods tab and noticing that once you create a reporting period, and once you close a reporting period, you're able to generate a payment request directly from the reporting period by clicking on this icon here next to the reporting period dates. You can also go to post award, cash flow, and payment requests, which we'll do here in a little bit. We'll submit a couple to kind of walk through the different ways you can access payment requests. But first, I want to get started by clicking on this icon right here, which will take me directly to my payment request form that I can fill out and that I can submit to DED for reimbursement. So here on the payment request form itself, what you'll be able to do is you'll be able to give your payment request a name. And we're requesting that your payment request name is titled payment request, and then the number of request this is. So for example, if you've already had 4 payment requests that have been approved, then this will be your 5th payment request. And your payment request name should be payment request 5. So again, if you have 4 payment requests that have already been approved, then your next subsequent request that you submit will be called payment request 5. The date created, you'll be able to populate this to indicate the date that you're creating this. Here, you'll see related reporting periods. So because I generated this payment request directly from the reporting period, you'll see that the reporting period is already tied in. And if I scroll down a little bit more to the financial details section of my payment request, I can see that the dollar amounts of my expenses for match and per each category is already listed in here. So this is the benefit, and this is why we enter those expenses first and close that reporting period. That way, all that detail rolls into our request. And then when I associate my reporting period with this payment request, those numbers automatically populate. So I'll show you an example where I'll remove the connection of the reporting period briefly to show you that this gets set back to 0. Now keep your eye here on the financial details section. I'm going to include that reporting period again. And once I do, then those numbers populate again because it knows how much we've expensed for the period of May. If you have other months that you have not submitted a payment request for, you can add those in here as well. So you have the ability to tie in multiple months of reporting periods into one single payment request, or you can just do one payment request per month reporting period on the reimbursements, that is. Speaking of reimbursements, you'll have the ability to indicate the payment type. So right now we're working on a reimbursement request. In a little bit, we'll explore how to do the advance. So down here in the financial details section, you'll see here that we have our expense amounts for the category, grant funds plus match. Here it's going to tell me how much we have in match funds. And then here it provides me with the net total. And this net total is the figure that we should be submitting for reimbursement on our reimbursement request, because this is the total of the grant funds portion of our expenses. So here, I'm going to type in that net total for the requested amount. You'll see here that this shows the remaining grant balance. At any point throughout the process, you'll be able to click here on the remaining grant balance, and it's going to provide you with a lot of the key details and key financial indicators um, in terms of how we can go ahead and kind of view where we're at in terms of progress on this grant, and how we can see where we are before we submit our reimbursement request. So you can always reference those numbers, especially as we're going in and especially as we're going through. So I'm going to scroll down here, and there's the comment section, and then there's the attachments tab. There's no requirement to put anything here in the comment section. However, the attachments tab here, we have to attach our request for funds form. So remember, I showed you how you can access the request for funds form either through Amplifund. You can access it also, you can get it from DED themselves. You may already have existing RFF forms to fill out. You can fill them out, get them signed, and then upload them here on the attachments tab by clicking attachments, uploading your request for funds, and making sure that that's in there before you submit your reimbursement request. So going through and making sure that you have all the details on your payment requests. We put in the payment request name, which should feature, which should be the number of requests that you're submitting after any other approved ones. So again, in this scenario, I already have 4 that are approved. So this is going to be my 5th request. And then we're connecting any associated reporting periods, indicating the payment type. We're just going down here. These financial details will show everything that's rolled up from your expenses in your reporting period. You'll put in the net total, which is just the grant funds amount only. You'll attach your request for funds here, and then we'll go ahead and we'll click on submit. And you'll see this little reminder, as part of submission, this actually submits your reimbursement request in to your DED program manager. As soon as they receive as soon as you send this, they receive a notification that you've submitted your reimbursement request. They'll also be able to take action on here. And then you'll also be able to receive notification when they do take action on this. So you'll submit this, your DED program rep will be notified as soon as you submit this, and then you will also in turn be notified once they take a decision either approving or rejecting the reimbursement request. So I'm going to go ahead and click on submit to get this submitted. So now that we've submitted our payment request, I wanted to talk about another scenario that may come up. So there may be a situation where you've gone in and you've entered your expenses for May, you've closed out the month, you've created the reporting period, and then you've submitted your reimbursement request for the month of May. You may have done all those steps, and then you may realize that maybe you forgot an expense for May. You have an invoice that came later, but is still for the month of May, but you've already closed out and you've submitted for May. So in that scenario, you'll still go in and you'll still create it as an expense with the May date on it, and we will just roll it through into our next reporting period and our next request that we submit. So I'll show you an example. We'll go back to the expenses page here, and I'm going to enter in another expense for the month of May, despite the fact that we've already submitted May. So again, in these scenarios where you've already closed your reporting period, you've already submitted your reimbursement request, it's important to still enter in the expense and know that the expense will roll into your next reporting period. So I'm going to go back to our post-award financial and expenses page. And I'm going to go back, repeat the same process to create an expense. Select my category, put in my direct cost. On this one, I'll say that, it's grant funds only. And again, even though I've already submitted for May, I'm still going to put the May date on, especially since we're entering in the date that the invoice was actually paid. So go ahead and select May, and then again, still mark it as reviewed. Go through the same steps in terms of entering in your source documentation, indicating program income or RLF here on this screen, and clicking on create. So you realize you left out a May expense after the fact. You're still going in, you're still entering in the expense. And what you're going to do and what you're going to see here is that on the next reporting period that you go to create, you go to post-award management reporting periods. So that when I go and when I enter in my reporting period now for June, that May expense will roll in to my June reporting period. So that's the process to follow. If you've already closed out a specific month, you've already requested reimbursement on that month, still create the expense with the correct date, and that expense will roll into your next month's reporting period and will be part of the next drawdown that you submit. So I see here, even though it has the May date on it, because May's already closed, the expense just rolls in to our next reporting period. So we took a look at how to submit those reimbursement requests by entering in expenses, making sure that they had the correct status and that they had the correct date on them, and then also going in and marking them as reviewed, closing those reporting periods, and then submitting our request for reimbursement in order for us to be able to submit for reimbursement. Now, some programs also allow for advance payment requests. So again, this is specific to your program. If it allows for advance payment requests, let's take a look at how we can set up an advanced request. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go to the post-award tab here. And in order to access our payment request screen, we're going to go to cash flow and payment requests. You'll be able to access your payment requests at any time by going here, again, to cash flow and payment requests. When I'm here and when I'm on my payment request screen, in order to initiate my advanced request, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to click on the plus sign here. This is going to allow me to create my advanced payment request. So some scenarios where you'll be entering in a some scenarios where you'll be entering in or submitting an advanced payment request. There may be scenarios in which you're actually where you actually have some costs incurred, but the vendor has not yet been paid. So that may be a scenario where if your program allows it, you can submit your advanced payment request. The naming convention will follow the same and which should be consistent with the naming convention that we've already discussed. You're going to name it as the next number in sequence after all of your approved payment requests. So for example, if you have 5 approved payment requests, then this will be payment request 6. Date created, again, you use the date field. We're not going to be tying in any reporting periods or anything because this is just going to be an advanced payment request. So here under payment type, we go from selecting reimbursement to advance. You'll notice a little bit of a difference here. When I select advance, there is just the option to put in the total amount of projected expenses here so that you can indicate what the total amount of those costs incurred have been that you're requesting an advance for. When you're putting in your projected expenses here, you're putting in again the direct cost, which is grant funds plus match. So in this scenario, if it's a total amount of $1,000 and 5,000 is match, you're going to go ahead here in the match contribution field, click on the pencil icon, put in how much of that you matched, and then your request amount is going to be the total amount minus whatever you've matched. So again, we're submitting our advance request, we're going in, we're indicating advanced here, we're putting in our projected expenses, the total amount plus match, we're entering in the match contribution, and then we're requesting only the grant funds, so not the match. Here, when we're looking at our comments and attachments field, again, what we will be doing is we will be attaching a couple of different things where here we're still attaching our request for funds and we're also attaching our source documentation. So previously when we were submitting our reimbursement, we submitted the source documentation on the expense level. Here we'll be submitting the source documentation on the payment request in addition to the request for funds. So I'm going to click on the choose file button and I'm going to attach my request for funds as well as my source documentation here. And I can see that those 2 items have been uploaded. And now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to submit this advance request. So again, once I submit this request for the advance, my program rep at DED gets notified that this has been submitted. And you'll be notified if it's been approved. You'll be notified, if it's been rejected, if there's any adjustments or changes that need to be made to it. Now, you're submitting an advance request here. Eventually, once you get the advance paid and once you get everything paid, you still will have to enter in an expense for the amount that you've received as an advance. And that expense can just be rolled into your next to the next report or reimbursement request that you submit. So regardless of whether or not you're going to be submitting reimbursement for this expense again, the expense still has to be entered in. And there are a couple of requirements on that expense as well. So let's go ahead and let's take a look at how to enter in the expense for your advanced request after the fact. So it's included in whatever is the next reporting period that you submit. So we're going to go back to our post-award financial and expenses page here. And I'm going to click on the plus sign. And we're going to create our expense for that advance request. So remember, it was a total of $1,000 which was split evenly, grant funds and match funds. So I'm going to type in my 1,000 right here. We're going to put in the expense date, which again is the date of the invoice. We're going to move our expense status to reviewed because we want it to roll into our reporting period. Here in our financials tab, we need to indicate, just like with any other expense, that the 500 was a match contribution. On the attachments tab, we've already submitted our source documentation on the on the payment request. So here, all we need to do is we need to upload a bank statement showing that the check was cleared. So I'm going to click on the upload file button here. We're going to upload that bank statement that shows the check was cleared. In addition to the upload, we have this tab at the end where we're still indicating, program income, RLF funds. And if I scroll down, now this section is required because this is part of our advance. So here, we're going to have to put in the advance request name, the date that we received the advance payment from the state, the date that the check was issued to the vendor, check number, and then the date that we processed the payment. So these advanced fields now become required because we're entering in this expense on an advanced payment that we've submitted for. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click on create. So now that expense has been created. Let's talk a little bit about how it's handled because it is going to roll into our next reporting period, but we don't want it to be entered in. We don't want to request payment on it because we already received payment on it from the advance. So we're going to go to post-award management so we can look at those reporting periods again. I'm going to pull up that June reporting period. So when I'm ready to submit my June reporting period here, I'm going to go to the reporting period section. I'm going to take a look at our reporting period. Here we have our total awarded amount and the total expense amount for the period. This is going to include that advance expense. So we'll take a look at how to deal with it on the payment request itself. Number of unreviewed expenses is showing 0. That's a good sign. That's a good thing. Let's scroll down and close out the reporting period. I'm going to click back here on the reporting periods tab. And now we're going to go through and we're going to submit our reimbursement request. So again, I'm going to click this button right here to submit the payment request from this reporting period that we just closed. The naming convention is the same. So this is the next one in sequence. After I had my first 6 approved, this is payment request number 7. Date created, reporting period pulled into it. And now this is pulling in all of our expenses. So what we need to do here is we need to remove the amount from the calculation. So we have our expense that we're submitting reimbursement for, which was $100. And then we also have the $1,000 expense that we already received in advance for, where we already received the $500. So since we already received $500, I need to subtract $500 for the net total. I'm not requesting reimbursement for that money. So I'm going to go in here only requesting reimbursement for the $100. Again, when we're going in and when we're uploading our documentation, we're still submitting the request for funds form because we're still submitting everything like normal for our um, reimbursement request on that $100 that we're submitting for. So I'm ready to go ahead and submit this. Click submit. And that gets submitted to your DED program rep. So now that we've looked at how to enter expenses, how to roll those expenses into our reporting period and close our reporting periods, and then tie those reporting periods into our reimbursement requests. And then we looked at the process of entering in our and submitting an advance request, as well as then reconciling, the amount that we've received on the advance later on. Let's take a look at some of the other requirements from the program in terms of documents that need to be uploaded. So for our CDBG programs here, we have the professional services agreement, which needs to be uploaded before anyone can even submit um, a payment request. So on every award has a documents folder. And one thing that you'll be able to do with your documents folder is you'll be able to receive documents that DED is pushing down to you. You'll also be able to upload documents that you want to share with DED. And in addition to being able to share documents with DED, you can also just use the documents folder to store documents that are internal to your organization as well. You have an unlimited amount of document storage that you can utilize in here. Anything that you want to upload here as a document, you can either upload a document or create a folder by utilizing these buttons in the top right-hand corner. Anything that you upload here or in any folder that you create in this space, in this area, is uploaded internally. In order to view any documents that have been shared with you by DED or to share documents with them, that all takes place within the public folder. So go ahead and click on the public folder. And here, when you click on the public folder, you'll be able to create new folders. You'll also be able to upload any documents. So when you're uploading your professional services agreement, you'll want to go ahead and create your own folder here. When you're creating your folder, the folder name should be consistent with the activity that you're creating the folder for. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to create a folder. And when I go to create the folder, we'll see here, I'm able to type in any name that I want, regarding the activity. That I'm submitting the professional services agreement for. So I'm going to create my folder, and then I'm actually going to go into the folder and I'm going to upload my professional services agreement for that activity. And I'm going to go to the top right-hand corner and click on Upload Documents in order for me to click the Upload button. And I'm going to upload my professional services agreement for the activity. Click on Upload. And now I have my document folder, my document that's been uploaded. You can see it's been uploaded in the right folder, in the public folder, which means that DED will be able to view it. You can continue this process for any other documentation you want to upload and make available to your DED program rep. You can create additional folders for any other additional information, regardless of which program or which award you're managing in the system, you'll be able to upload whatever you need. So make sure that you're going in, uploading your docs folder, or creating your document folders appropriately, and uploading documents. So today we looked at how to access your budget, how to report expenses against that budget, and then how to submit the uh, the reimbursement and advance requests, and how to have all those expenses and documentation um, that is that is associated there. So at this point, we are going to take a brief pause and we're going to start to review questions that have come in. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to submit those now via that Q&A feature, the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. We'll take a brief pause, take a look at the questions. Again, keep submitting your questions if you have any new ones, and we'll be back on the line to answer the questions. One thing that I will mention regarding the request for funds process, you can access the form from Amplifund. However, when we submit the request for funds form, it still has to have the signatures in blue ink. So you still need to have those signed before you upload those requests for funds form to your payment request. And then we can go ahead and um, we can, and you'll submit those in your payment request, but they need to still be signed in blue ink by the authorized official. In terms of documentation on expenses, um, The documentation that's required on the expense is the invoice or any of the source documentation. Again, remember the expense date of that should indicate the date the invoice was paid. So invoice is going to be a common one. However, you can always refer to your program manual, your program rep, and the specific user guides on the DED Amplifund page also indicate the type of documentation. So it may depend on your award or your program. So if you're not sure, then you can refer to the program manual, your program rep, or the specific user guides on the Amplifund, on the DED Amplifund page. In terms of activations for and when you can access your pre-2020 award, some of those have already gone out. If you haven't gotten it yet, they're still coming throughout the day today and tomorrow as well. By tomorrow, you should have your activation, or your organization should have the activation email to get in and to view your pre-2020 award. We got a question about how to add in a user for your organization. There are a lot of resources on the DED support site for that. In addition to previous sessions, users are added in the administration section here. So you'll be able to go to administration, system security, and users to see a list of all existing users that are in your account. And in order to add a new user, you can go ahead and click on the plus sign, type in the first name, last name, and email address in order to add in a user for your organization. Also, the DED support site has specific documentation on how to do that. If And the previous webinar that we did that's on the DED support site, there was also a um, there's also a walkthrough on how to do that there. But it's administration, system security, click on the little drop down arrow, go to users, get a list of users in your system, and then also go to the top right hand corner, click on the plus sign to create a new user. We had a question about the ability to submit both reimbursement and advance requests during a project. You do have the ability to submit both. It's not kind of one or the other. So you can submit reimbursement requests and advance requests for your community within Amplifund. Much like what we looked at today, where we went in, we entered in expenses, and then submitted a reimbursement request based on those expenses. And then later on, we had an advanced request that we had to submit. We submitted an advanced request. Now, we can't submit an advanced request and reimbursement request at the same time, but you'll still be able to submit an advanced and a reimbursement request, given that your program does allow advanced requests to be submitted. So if you're an NHTF recipient, then you will not be allowed to submit advanced requests at all. Other questions that we received and that we have some answers to, one is directly related to that advance and reimbursement request question. Since they're two separate actions, do they require two separate signatures? And the answer is yes, they do require the two separate signatures since they're two separate actions. Another question we received is what constitutes the proper documentation? You already talked about this a little bit, but it really depends on the program for which you were awarded. So make sure that you're referring to your program manuals, you're asking your program rep, and referencing the program specific user guides on the opportunity.nebraska.gov/Amplifund website. Request for funds form have to have all signatures in blue ink still. There's no specific file type that is identified. The files can be in PDF, a Word document, or on a spreadsheet. And if you already have forms in process or in progress, you can utilize any forms that are found on DED's website. If you have a form, just make sure that your version matches the ones that are on the website and it'll be acceptable. Regarding general administration invoices, those can be submitted on the same request as the project invoices. So before we wrap up today, I did also want to make sure that everyone's aware of support options that you can access through Amplifund. So if you do want to create a support ticket and submit that to the Amplifund support team, you can go to your icon toolbar from any page within Amplifund, click on the eye icon for help and support. That's going to open up this modal, which will allow you to submit a support ticket. On the modal, it'll auto-populate with your first name and with your full name, as well as your username, your email. You'll be able to enter in a subject for your question. So if you have a question maybe about adding users, for example, put that in the subject, type in the description of your question here, maybe attach any screenshots or any files you think are relevant, and then click on the submit button. That will complete the action of submitting a support ticket to our customer success team. Our success team hours are Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Central Time. And if you submit something after hours, we just pick it up and respond when the next business day. So please feel free to submit a support ticket from within Amplifund as well if you have any questions.